As I mentioned, today we're announcing our second proposal for making Indiana the state that works. We're promoting the kind of policies that will make Indiana the best small business climate in America. My vision for the Hoosier State means that we have to focus on private sector employment, on attracting new investment with emphasis on areas of our historic strength, and by making sure that we have the best educated and the best skilled workforce in America. Now, we know that the health of Indiana's economy depends on the health of Indiana's small businesses. There are more than 112,000 small businesses in Indiana, and they account for more than 48% of Indiana's jobs. To make Indiana the state that works, we have to help all business, and especially small business. And I believe the best way to do that is to continually tackle the burdens of excessive regulation. And I believe that we can do this at no additional cost to Hoosier taxpayers. Here's some of the background. In 2011, the state of Indiana adopted 292 new regulations. That's one new regulation for every workday of every week of the year. And that's not a new trend. The state of Indiana has adopted roughly 300 new regulations every year for the past 4 years. And according to one report, businesses in Indiana have to jump through no less than 15 different bureaucratic hoops before they can hire their first employee. We can do better. But to do better, I think it's time for a timeout from regulations in the Hoosier State. If I'm elected governor, on day one, I will issue an executive order placing a moratorium on all new regulations on Indiana businesses. Every dollar that a business spends complying with bureaucratic paperwork is a dollar that they could have invested in creating a Hoosier job. Anything we do to reduce the impact of regulations on small businesses will help create Hoosier jobs. Now, let's be clear. Some regulations are necessary, and we will make exceptions going forward for regulations imposed by a federal mandate, for rules that will reduce the cost or burden of job creation, and those needed for emergency health or safety concerns. But beyond that, we will impose on day one of a new administration a moratorium on all new regulations in the Hoosier State. And then we'll start a look back at regulations that are on the books in Indiana to ask the question of whether or not they make sense for Hoosier businesses in the city and on the farm. Now, as many of you know, Governor Daniels established the Office of Management and Budget and tasked it with regulatory oversight authority. My administration will make regulatory review and oversight a priority of the Office of Management and Budget, including a cost-benefit analysis on all proposed regulations to make sure that they don't stifle job growth. And who better to help us decide what regulations make sense and what don't than the Hoosiers who live under them themselves. As we review current regulations during the moratorium, we will utilize what's called crowdsourcing to seek input from those who are most impacted by existing regulations, and we'll let Hoosier common sense prevail. To be the state that works, we'll let Hoosiers tell us what works for them and what doesn't, what makes sense and what doesn't in the workplace. And if it doesn't make sense, it needs to go. With a little common sense, we can save Hoosier businesses from a burden of excessive regulation and red tape, and we can create Hoosier jobs. Now, while putting a freeze on new regulations, we're also going to take a good look at business fees too. More than one business owner, as I've traveled around the state in the last year, has said to me that they're getting feed to death. The state of Indiana collects, for instance, $458 million in fees every year. Another $145 million from permits, $117 million from penalties and interest from people who probably have a hard time figuring out which fees they have to pay in the first place. Now, clearly we need to ensure these fees are actually providing service to the state's customers and not just functioning as hidden taxes. So we'll take a hard look at the state's practice of directly regulating jobs held by Hoosiers. Listen to this. Today, 1 out of every 7 Hoosier workers is in a field officially regulated by the state of Indiana. Let me say that again. 1 out of every 7 Hoosier workers is in a field officially regulated by the state of Indiana. The truth is, licensing has grown by leaps and bounds in the last several decades. And licensing, we all know, in and of itself can be a barrier for economic growth. I will support efforts to continually review our current occupational licenses and enhance review of legislation creating new licenses. But we need to develop a bias against new regulation and new licenses unless the benefits to the public outweigh the costs. Now, there is a committee known as the Regulated Occupation Evaluation Committee, ROEC, that was created to review license occupations and check that growth in recent years. I will propose that we restructure, rename, and retask the ROEC committee to the express purpose of reducing the number of occupational licenses in the state of Indiana. The restructured board will be named the Eliminate, Reduce, and Streamline Employment Regulation Committee, or ERASER for short. The ERASER Committee's mission will simply be to erase unnecessary barriers to entry into the workplace by Hoosier entrepreneurs and businesses. We would ask the newly retasked committee to continue the effort that's underway and ensure that they seek input from the public when they're developing their recommendations as well. But we would go even further. This newly retasked committee would also focus on not just sunset review of licenses, but also a sunrise review of legislation that would create new licenses in the state of Indiana. This sunrise review should focus on the costs and benefits of new licenses and again seek full input from the public. The process of reviewing regulations and assessing new licensing requests is already in place, so this won't cost taxpayers any additional money. But it absolutely will save businesses and employees and entrepreneurs an awful lot of money. That's time and money they can invest in growing their businesses, which is good for them and good for Indiana. With this plan, I believe Indiana can become one of the best small business climates in America. We can increase investment, employment, and the quality of our workforce without compromising the health, safety, and well-being of Hoosier workers or Hoosier families.